Part 5, Dealing with Clients. Chapter 22, Homework. Most of us live a love-and-date relationship with homework, don't we? We know the importance of our students dedicating time to studying English outside the classroom. We know they can improve by leaps and bounds when they do so, and we do hope they find the time to work on their progress by themselves. Before we delve into this, let us reflect on these questions. How much of this assigned homework do you need to correct? How much of it is possible to be corrected by your students? How much time of your day, week, do you spend marking papers, correcting tasks? Is this time you invest in the correction well planned? Do you include this time in your price? Do you accept homework out of established deadlines? How do you deal with dedicated learners that do extra tasks on their own and expect to be helped with their corrections? How do you deal with the opposite kind of students, the ones who never do homework? When I started teaching, I used to carry tons of workbooks everywhere in order to correct them, even though the workbooks had an answer key. Yes, I did that. But why? Because I wanted to know where the students were making mistakes so that I could plan my classes based on them. Beautiful, right? Some teachers might relate to this feeling. In a perfect world, it would be fantastic. Picture this. We would have fewer students, get well paid, and all of our time would be to focus on these few. But the real world is not so pretty, I know. Back then, I had a lot of students, and this extra homework took a serious toll on my mental health. I almost gave up teaching because I couldn't find the time to rest on the weekends, for the amount of correction I needed to do was massive. Something had to be done. What I did was to quit correcting anything that the student could do on their own. My deal with them was for them to bring me their corrected workbooks with the mistakes they had found. They were to analyze their mistakes, see if they understood what they had gotten wrong, and in case they couldn't work out what had happened, they would bring their questions to class. Part of my class was to explain and work on these problems. My life got back on track, as well as my sanity. Also, believe me, my students started learning much more because they were doing their own analysis and investing more time in their learning. It was a surprising win-win situation. What have I learned from it all? Students must take accountability for their learning. It is unacceptable that, here in the 21st century, with all technology available, there might be the need for us to do things that, otherwise, could make our students more autonomous. As a matter of fact, by trying to eliminate unnecessary tasks of my routine, my students improved and my business survived. How about the tasks that demand our time, though? When you assign writing, for instance, you are likely to correct them outside the classroom, right? You might need to use the class to bring up topics you find interesting from the pieces you have corrected. But other than that, the greatest part of your marking will inevitably come from the outside classroom time. So, how do you avoid feeling overwhelmed? One thing that you can do is to add marking time to your price. Let's say you have decided to teach 5 hours a day, but you have realized that you need to work 2 hours a day on corrections. So these hours must be part of your financial plan, and it must be included in your price. Not directly though, as you don't need to tell your students they will be paying for overtime work, but you must get paid for the time you are focusing on your students' development. Even though you may love your job, this is still a job, not volunteer work. If these correction hours are included, you may realize that 5 hours a day may not be so necessary for you to have the salary you initially intended to. Chances are that 4 hours would be enough, and 1 day a week you could work part-time to have some spare time in your routine. Anything that can reduce the overwhelming sensation of working too much is welcome in this plan. Alongside this strategy, you can also limit the number of assignments each student is allowed to hand in every week. Then, you would not risk getting more homework than you planned. Let's say you have a dreamy, dedicated student that produces 5 pieces of writing a week. Our scenario. Let's say you have 2 or 3 of them. You will end up surpassing your initial plan of correction time, which, instead of letting you feel proud of these amazing learners, you will end up annoyed and exhausted. For the same reason, how about setting a deadline for homework to be done? Let's say you don't do it, and then, all of a sudden, a great deal of students decide to do everything on the same week, which would make you unexpectedly sacrifice a day off, a weekend, some hours of your free time, and so on. Would it be fair to you? You can tell me, but Agnes, I cannot be so strict. Confession time. I am not that strict either. There are moments that I open exceptions, and you might certainly do so too. But the student must know this is an exception, not the rule to be broken every time they feel like. It is much easier to deal with a grateful student who understands how generous you are than have someone frustrated because you don't want to help them. Do you see how a good negotiation can facilitate everyone's life? These negotiations will work well either with groups or one-on-ones. However, if you work with one-on-ones, one alternative possibility is to use classroom time to correct the extra writing piece together, if you feel comfortable enough, bringing up points to be discussed with your students. I myself do it a lot. Nowadays, most of my correction time is done in class, as most of my students are one-on-ones. As regards homework, there is another problem that you might face. Students who never do it. It can be frustrating as students' progress might be incredibly affected. When you work with kids and teenagers, and it happens week after week, it might be time you discuss this matter with their relatives to have them talk to your students, reinforcing the importance of dedicating learning time outside the classroom. If you work with adults, on the other hand, there's nothing to be done but to accept the reality. We can definitely talk to them about it, but as adults, we know how engulfing life can be, and if the language being learned is not a priority, nothing will make them do their homework. But before we accept this fact as a lost cause, we have to ask ourselves, are the assignments meaningful and interesting to our students? Have we tried materials to incentivize them? Have we varied their homework? Articles, videos, writing, podcasts, audio messages, social media videos, and so on? I have students who never ever do what I assign, but they bring to class interesting articles and videos they have come across outside the classroom. Okay then, let's work on what is meaningful to them and make the best use of their focus. What matters is that they are using the language somehow. Instead of feeling frustrated by students who don't do what has been assigned, let us look on the bright side. We have less work to do in our free time.